Hello everybody, today this is VoiceOver Dale. We're going to be painting a graffiti shirt with IKON, IKON on the shirt. He ordered a style from the website, but based on his request, I think he'll be okay with me deviating a little bit from the design. We're going to go a little crazy and we're going to have some fun with it. I'm not too worried about copying what he ordered exactly because I'm the artist here. And we're going to have a lot of fun with it, and I think he's really going to like it. So, first thing we do, as always, is we're going to space out our letters appropriately, kind of get a feel for where they're going to go so we don't run out of room, that we got plenty of spacing between them, that everything is weighted and balanced correctly. We're going no detail here, just a little bit of style, just to figure out where everything is going. We want it in the right place. Now that we got the basic layout of our letters done, we're going to go back in and block out our letters, get a feel for how big they need to be, try to develop a little bit of style and figure out how the letters are going to flow together. Even on a design like this where I have a lot of freedom, I want to maintain some amount of legibility and not get too crazy with everything. I'm just about done with these outlines here. I'm not too worried about getting this sketch perfect because when I come back with black to do the real outlines, that's when I add a lot of style and the design really comes to life. I like to add these bars on the top and bottom of some designs to help balance things out. The letters themselves aren't symmetrical, but when I start to account for these bars, then I can have a symmetrical design confined in a nice clean shape without worrying too much about the individual letters being symmetrical. Now this is a step I typically don't do, but in my effort to be a more stylistic graffiti artist, I'm going to add some more flair and blocks and chips and effects to my sketches before I go in with my black outline. And I'm hoping that that's going to result in a more complex design. We'll see what happens. I hope you can see how excited I am to start the black outlines. This is my favorite part of any design. If you're used to using spray cans, you'll be scratching your head right now, wondering how I'm going to do the fill-ins. This is airbrush art, it's a little bit different. The colors that I'm going to use, I'm going to expand on this later a little bit, aren't necessarily all opaque, so I can do these black outlines first, and then fill them in with colors. And there's pros and cons to that, as you will see. I came in with red here thinking I would outline everything and then do a red drop shadow. You'll see I quickly changed my mind that I'm going to go with a black drop shadow instead. No worries, I'll just paint right over it. My black paint is opaque, so that red paint is gone. There are several types of shadows. What I've done now is what I call a drop shadow. It's more of a three-dimensional effect than a shadow. It's just I pick a direction that light is going to come from, or a direction that I want the letters to look like they're tilted from, and I put a solid black drop shadow across the whole thing. What I'm going to do next here is more shading, is actual shadowing, shading, looking at the light source. And this is where airbrushing is different than spray can graffiti art. Using spray cans, almost every color is opaque. Every color covers up every other color. With airbrushing, that's not the case. Even your opaque colors, like this black, don't necessarily cover up what's below them every time, especially not without a couple coats. So I'm able to go in with this shadowing, with this shading, underneath my fill-in, and once I do my fill-in, you're still going to see these shadows through the paint. I'm going to cover this all up with green paint. You're still going to see this shadow. And this is a great part about airbrushing. It might seem like an obstacle if you're not used to it, but once you start thinking along these lines, you're able to create a lot of effects a lot more easily than you would be able to with a spray can. If you want a nice transparent effect, or a lighter shadow, or some background graphics to a fill-in or something like that, you can lay those down with an airbrush first and then cover it up with color, whereas with a graffiti spray can, you would have to get the exact color that you want for every effect. You can't layer them. Layers are great. Airbrushing is great. Now I'm going to go ahead and finish my red outline because I'm a little bit OCD and I have to finish it before I can do my fills since I started it in the first place. These outlines are fun too, just a nice solid stroke all the way around. I start to do the green fill-in and realize that my airbrush is having a little bit of trouble. It's been sitting for a couple days. It's got some dried paint on the inside that's preventing the trigger from coming back. So I work the needle out. I'm going to use my thumbnail to scrape some of that paint off, and I'm going to put it back in the airbrush. I'm going to push the needle in and out a little bit on the airbrush to make sure I'm pushing out any dried paint. And I'm going to hold some pressure down while I screw this chuck nut back in right here. And I'm resetting the needle, making sure that it's flush up against the tip of the airbrush. We'll spray that paint and we should be good to go. Now we're going to start with our fill-in. I have not really determined the style for the fill-in yet. I'm just figuring out what happens as I go. I know that I want to have some highlights, some lights and darks in here, but I don't know to what depth I want them. We're just going to play around and see what happens. Done with the base layer, and I noticed that there's a lot of contrast between the lights and darks, so I used this green to help mute out some of those white highlights and get them back to a level consistency. Another great thing about airbrushing is the ability to tint colors with other colors. Again, the paint isn't opaque, so they don't cover each other up completely. This fluorescent yellow paint gives me a nice yellow highlight on top of my green letters without covering up the black or the red, which is real great. Every color works with other colors a little differently once you know how they interact, once you know what colors cover up other colors more so than others. You get to start playing around with some cool effects. Notice I'm doing this before I do any white highlights because this yellow would very much cover up any white highlights it did, making them then yellow highlights, which I don't want. My second favorite thing in the world after black outlines is white highlights. Almost every design I do will have white highlights on the top and on the bottom. I guess you call those low lights. Whatever. There they are. A little bit of airbrush trouble here. I'm having a bit of a clog. I try to get it out a couple times. Not quite working yet. Trying to make it work anyway. No, I can't deal with that. Alright. Now we're good to go. I'm definitely not going for photorealism here. I know where highlights and shadows should go, but I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time calculating that and rendering out perfect highlights and reflections. I'm just playing around, doing a graffiti design, keeping it nice and simple. Here I add some white accents just for fun, just something. Probably my third favorite thing in the world is splatter. You can very easily with an airbrush create a splatter effect by spraying paint at the end of a clothespin or another object and letting that paint splatter off the end of the clothespin from the air pressure of the airbrush. You can control the drip size, you can control the consistency, and you can very easily control the location of all the drips and create a really awesome effect very easily with a little bit of practice. Just don't get too carried away and drip paint all down your shirt. And the last thing I'll do here is add some red drips on the outside just to finish off the design. And we're pretty much wrapped up here. I like the way it turned out. It's a little odd, it's a little funky, but it works. I think he's gonna like it a whole lot. And I hope you guys liked it. And I hope you learned something from this video. I hope you learned something about airbrushing, about graffiti, and I hope that I encouraged you and inspired you to pick up an airbrush maybe if you haven't and learn how to do it. There's a lot of cool things you can do with it.